Hey Rebels, welcome to the inaugural episode of 2021 for this podcast. Today's episode is all about looking back at the beer of 2020, thinking and drinking critically about all things Sask craft beer. Rebellion's greasy sales guy, Paul Chicoine, is here to help me break it all down. We're going to be talking about our favorite beers, we're going to be talking about who's doing things right, and we're going to share a few stories and make some predictions about where we think the Sask craft beer scene is headed in 2021. So let's get into it. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a long time coming, I think. At least, 2 or 3, 4 years since you've been doing this?
3 years.
3 years. Yeah, this is kind of my podcast cherry, as it might be. Yep.
I'm surprised you haven't been on a podcast before.
I think we need to find the right topic.
I would have suspected wrestling, hockey, or music.
That sums it up. I am into sports, and I think that 2021 is going to be a great year, and this is a great way to kind of kick it off.
How was your Christmas, New Year's?
It was pretty quiet. I think everybody's was, but I was able to kick back, and I've been stockpiling beer a long time. So I've been kind of dipping my toe back into what we had in the summer, and I've been kind of enjoying some of the fruits of our labors without, really thinking a whole lot about it, honestly.
The big gift for me this year was an espresso machine from my wife, and I will always blame craft beer for getting me addicted to coffee. I think it was the smartest thing she ever did for our family.
I unfortunately wasn't able to enjoy but maybe 2 coffees over Christmas, but what I was able to enjoy was my daughter and I did a little home renovation over the Christmas vacation, and I was able to spend a lot of time at home. I took all the vacation I could, so I was off from the 22nd all the way until basically today.
Is that unheard of for you?
We try to do that every other year. Steph, the other salesperson, and myself, we try to kind of go back and forth, but, lack of traveling this year kind of slowed that down a little bit. So I had a bunch of holidays to use up, and I thought, you know what, let's just do it.
So we know you're on the sales team, and we know you pulled back on coffee over Christmas, but what is your role at Rebellion? If I'm going to explain to somebody who doesn't really know who you are yet, what is it you do?
I think that's a really good question. Yeah, I like to kind of think of myself as a bit of a utility type hitter. I guess my formal role is to help with sales and be part of the sales team. I also work on the logistics side, and I help facilitate a lot of our deliveries and even help get some products or some raw goods. I do some maintenance around the brewery when it's required. I work with some of our outside contractors and vendors, and I try to just make sure that we don't drop any balls along the way. That's my job.
I wanted to make a joke about you holding a wrench and looking busy, but honestly, if I saw you holding a wrench, I would say, yeah, Paul's busy.
That's usually the way it is. If Paul's holding the wrench, he's probably asking why somebody else isn't holding the wrench. That's kind of what I do, but more so is we have a lot of moving pieces, and it seems like the more that we try to grow and we try to keep ourselves on a pretty tall growth curve. Yeah. I seem to have to pull back from some of the things that I kind of enjoy the most, and I kind of lean into some of the things I'm a little bit more uncomfortable with, but we have a pretty strong team here. So if I can teach somebody to take over 1 or 2 of my small tasks, it seems to help us all out. So
when people have asked me in the past what you do, I kind of say, you're the guy I go to because you know a guy?
I know a lot of guys. I made a lot of friends. I might look new, but I've been around. I've been in industry for over 25 years. I basically have a pretty good group of people that I can pull from, if that means getting some aggregate to put on the driveway or helping facilitate, maybe a lawyer or whatever else. So I seem to have a pretty good regime of friends.
I remember a couple of years ago we had a leak spring in the roof in the tap room, and immediately it was Paul's got it. Don't worry.
Yeah, I can make that happen for you. I can either make the leak or I can make it go away. Yeah, that's me.
How did you get into beer?
I got into beer. I started at a company, and one of the guys I worked with was making his own beer. And I thought it was crazy that I thought there was only one type of beer. And so he kind of explained to me that he was part of this club and they met in the basement of the Bushwhacker, and I thought it was kind of crazy. And he talked about guys like Michael Jackson, and I didn't want to be, in that situation. So I kind of stepped back and waited. And then I guess what happened was I kind of went to a few parties and realized that nothing was really working for me. So I ended up going to an Ales Club meeting and talking with my coworker about what happened at the meeting and trying some different beers, and then realizing that there's over 100 different styles of beer. And I wasn't able to try those anywhere, and I couldn't find them. Maybe the Bushwhacker at that time, Brewster's was the other one where you could try different flavors of beer. And I was like, the only way to really do it is by making it. So I got into it as a home brewer, and then being handy and having access to a lot of industrial equipment, I started making my own equipment and started brewing beer from scratch and all grain. And, I just kind of went down kind of a similar road that a lot of guys did. And I met some good friends at the Ales Club, and I ran into, Mark and Jamie, and I think that might have been the first go around of the Ales Club. And then as I became a senior guy, I ran into the Glenn Valgerdsons and a few different people along the way. And it's kind of amazing how my little beer journey has taken me over the last 20 years and, where we're standing today in 2021.
You see a lot of those guys from the old Ales Club back in the day are now opening or running breweries or brewing beer at these bigger.
Absolutely. The really interesting part is that back in the day, a lot of people would say to me, why don't you open up a beer store or a specialized store? And I said, under our government at the time really didn't have the means of letting us do that type of thing. And what I've kind of grown is the thinking of the monk who always made the best beer in the village was also the poorest guy in the village. So I was like, I don't know if this is for me. But what, was kind of changed is that a lot of us had the same ideas. We just had kind of a different way of getting there. Everyone's goal, I guess, as a home brewer was to make their own brewery. And a few of us have kind of gone that way, but a lot of us have actually worked in the beer industries, through different friendships and stuff like that. And I remember seeing, like Jeff Allport from Nokomis showing up at beer meetings. And yeah, now, there's Nokomis Brewery. So, and Pile of Bones was, kind of the same variation of Rebellion. I remember when we started Rebellion, we handed out some growlers at an Ales Club meeting, and those Pile of Bones guys were all sitting there, and maybe they didn't know it at the time, maybe they did, but, within 3 years later, they're, starting their brewery, and now they're hot on our heels, or we're hot on their heels, depending on which way you kind of want to look at it. So
I like what you said there. There's 6 new breweries that opened in 2020.
Yeah, that's insane. I think there's Rafter R and Better Brother and Iron Bridge. and in Lumsden, and I heard there's a couple more on the lot. I heard of one maybe out of Cupar, and Warman's got a couple, and that's awesome. That's great news. The year previous, there was a new brewery out of Battleford, or North Battleford, and Armory, and I never thought a brewery could succeed up there, and they're making a go of it. And now seeing these guys pop up in Maple Creek, or Warman's the fastest growing community in the country, and that community deserves to have breweries. And breweries shouldn't be this big, crazy idea. It should be every neighborhood should used to go back to having their neighborhood brewery, and not just a brew pub, but somebody that actually sends their product out. And that's the definition more so of what a brewery is not just going into their tap room and enjoying the product there, but also finding it on your local store shelf and whatever store that is in your neighborhood or whatever you favor. So it's amazing seeing these new brands. It's very colorful to see them on the store shelves. And that's what kind of gets my juices flowing.
With more than 15 Saskatchewan breweries, what do you see as the impact for 2021 and going forward for Saskatchewan?
I think the big impact, and it's a really positive thing, and it's going to force change in our restaurants and pubs. And if restaurant and pub owners, they are going to get bombarded with new product, and keeping and holding tight to the same 8 taps or 10 or 12 taps that you have. I think with 15 new breweries in the last little bit, and maybe over 20 breweries total, there's no reason why you can't be rotating product continually. The big change I see happening this year is that the local breweries are going to get even more aggressive, and they're going to ask publicly about why they're not on, or how come it's hard for them to get their product into more focused restaurants and bars, which is something we've tried for the last 6 years, and we have been successful. But we also know that when everything starts becoming more normal, and it will be, and it might take a few more months, but things will be normal, that I'm going to be able to get a beer from Maple Creek, and I'll be able to sit down in a restaurant in Yorkton and enjoy it. And I'll be able to enjoy, when I'm sitting in Kindersley, that beer from Back 40 Brewery in Yorkton. I'll be able to enjoy it there too. So I think we have a great opportunity to be able to have a taste of the province all around the province, and truly turn the province from being larger than what we think it is to more community-based, and supporting all the communities all around.
That's interesting. I was kind of thinking about the agriculture and the impact on farmers, local barley, local hops kind of getting off. But when you say restaurants, then I'm thinking, well, that's going to mean a more focused, locally oriented restaurant that gets to be more nimble than maybe a conglomerate, or a restaurant that doesn't get to pick its own menu. They just follow what corporate says from the franchisees down. They don't get a choice. And we get to see guys like Dale McKay and Harvest, and you can walk in there and they know our names. They can, hey, I shook Paul's hand last week and bought this keg of beer. Come get this. It's fresh from Rebellion. Just tapped it.
Well, I think that's a very unique aspect. From the sales side, what's really crazy is that bar and restaurant owners can design their menu with the idea of what seasonal beers are out there. They can actually do that same way. They can focus to see what produce, or what is the hot ticket coming out of the agriculture side or the produce side of it. With the breweries that are out right now, we all have seasonal beers, so there's a lot of choice. I think the other side of it, and just touching a little bit on the ag side, I think with companies like JGL looking at growing hops, and they sold out, which is fabulous. It kind of gives them a bit of a business case to expand. If they expand, there's a lot of breweries in the province that want their product. They want to be as locally sourced as possible. It's for years and years and years we've grown the best malt, and not in the last 20. It's only been the last 100 years that we've grown the best, malt-based barley and the most barley that's went malt grade anywhere in the world. We've often brewed the best beer. Our problem is we don't talk about how good our beer is. And as Saskatchewan people, we need to pump our tires up a little bit more about it. I always tell the story, and I heard a long time ago that Sierra Nevada would fly in, and they're one of my favorite breweries. They would fly in their private jet, and they would land in Saskatoon, and they would drive out to these fields. To Rostern. They'd watch them get planted. They'd make sure everything was good, and then they would fly home and then come back in the fall, and they would be here during harvest to see what their barley or their barley and their malt, what it's going to look like this year, and just to keep their finger on the pulse. And if that's good enough for a company like Sierra Nevada, that as home brewers and as beer geeks, we kind of put them on a pretty big pedestal for me. The pale ale has always been a go-to beer, and as much as I've tried to brew it as a home brewer, it's something I could never replicate. And I've always tried with a lot of exotic ingredients and not realizing that the ingredients I'm really trying to look for are in my backyard. And the breweries in the province, and those of us that are using as much locally sourced product, it just helps out the whole food chain. It helps employ 2 more people at the hop farms. It helps a farmer realize what he wants to put into the ground right now, and he's thinking about it in the spring. And it helps our everybody from the rail lines all the way up to the people that are selling it in the liquor stores. I know that there's a few liquor stores or a couple bigger names that actually bonus managers out on how much local product they can sell. And so when you see local product and it's featured, it's okay to buy it. It's okay to buy Saskatchewan. And sometimes using the word local gets a little overused, but looking for Saskatchewan made and, trying it out. Not all of us are the same. We're not all created equal. And when I say that, it's not a positive or a negative. It's more like, what your taste is. Sometimes my favorite beers aren't made in Regina. Sometimes they're out of Saskatoon. And I didn't realize that my taste could change as much as what they do. And it's actually a pretty awesome thing.
You and I know this because I do this a lot, is I'll often ask you to tell me what your perspective is on any given issue, because I know you're seeing things very differently than me. The way you view the world, your background, the way you grew up, it's a different school of thought. And I always value what you bring to the table because it's something we need. We need that diversity of thought. When it comes to local restaurants, we know they were hurting this year. We know they hurt through COVID, and it's going to be tough until the vaccine is widely available. Who was doing it right? Who was really kicking ass? Or do you think is maybe poised to do really well and come out of this COVID thing really well?
I've got a lot of customers, local customers, and even some chains. That some of the bigger chains that we did well was because they had a national ad campaign. They could stay top of mind. The guys that were able to pivot, frankly, they were the ones that were able to stay on top a little bit more. But it's some of the ones that didn't get a lot of maybe shout out. And one of the first ones was, places that have always done takeout, but they didn't realize that is going to be a feature part of their business now. A place like Luigi's, for instance, it's in my neighborhood. It was easy for my family to buy from. We didn't have to travel around. The takeout aspect was simple. We didn't have to go through the nationally branded app service. We could still phone them direct. They knew who we were. And they had decent beer on tap. Now, some of the restaurants aren't just clients of ours that I think are going to do well. I know that the pizza places and the traditional means of takeout type places, a lot of the Asian restaurants, I bet you they seen growth in their numbers. Some of the places that I thought would hurt a lot worse were the pubs that were in my neighborhood or the ones that I would go to. And my focus has shifted to transitioning from maybe having a beer after work to shifting to maybe going home and having one on the deck or right now maybe in the basement. So I think that hindsight and maybe foresight also is that some of the places we often expected that would be really doing awesome are hurting a little bit more. But a lot of those guys, what I see, kind of built their business and they're able to pivot quickly. And the ones that have always been able to pivot quickly and start selling off sale. Frankly, our government gave us the ability to sell off sale through pickup and go programs. Those that adapted to those programs and read the letter of the law and said, we can work with this, they're the ones that are succeeding.
How important was that for 2020 for restaurants to be able to do off sale to go?
I think the more you can offer a client, the more the client would be willing to come back. I think that companies that took advantage of it, it's another tool in their toolbox. It's just one more thing that can help them. Did I think they blew it up? No. Are they getting rich? Probably not. Are they keeping the lights on? Yes. Yeah, they're not having dead kegs sit on their draft lines, but they actually have the ability to sell more diverse product. And what's really happening, and maybe no one's talking about it, especially not the government, what I could see happening is the laws don't revert back after COVID slows down. I think that we have the opportunity to see some really serious change in our liquor laws and say that this might be more normal now because nobody's getting hurt. The government's going to get a little bit more off taxes. It's a little bit more socially responsible. And if you can order a 4-pack of beer with your pizza at the same restaurant, it's really mind-blowing from where we were, a few years ago.
5 years ago, yeah.
Like that, it's insane. I think that socially we could see a lot of change out of this for positive.
As long as people are cool.
As long as people are cool. And I don't hear any complaints right now.
I mean, I think what you just told me reminds me of how people were talking about marijuana, cannabis consumption. They were like, the sky's going to fall. We're going to have babies being born with all these problems. Society's going to go crazy and stupid. And really, none of that has happened. I haven't noticed a big change. And now that we see the relaxation of these liquor purchasing laws and distribution, I think most people have been fairly responsible. I haven't heard those kinds of complaints.
I think a lot of people aren't even realizing that the service is available. Those of us that have taken advantage of it, I think it's something that's a secret that we don't want to talk about. And I think that the government, it's one of those things that they're just going to look past later. It's something that's not going to get reprieved, going to get changed, go backwards, anything that is going to happen with us.
They're clearly measuring it, though. They're watching.
I think they're watching, but at the end of the day, I think that if we don't have social problems that are coming out of it, if the bars or restaurants can go back and thank the government for a few of these little changes, I think that we may not see a step backwards after this is over. I think you're bang on with the point about the marijuana and how that's kind of affected. I was driving down the road the other day and I seen a really crazy thing where I seen 2 police officers come out of a Subway alongside a guy that was coming out of a marijuana store, and the cops never even gave him a second look, just because this is where we are now. Seeing somebody grab a pizza or a bag with burgers in it and a 4-pack of beer along their side, and they're walking down the street, is going to be common. Hopefully we get a little bit more change, but right now this is pretty good.
Girl Scouts are staking out the cannabis shops when they're doing their cookie drives, and you can tell the enterprising ones blow out of their stock pretty quick.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I see it.
In terms of beer, what was your all-time favorite beer of 2020?
I had a couple. I think everybody wants me to say, a big IPA or something like that. The Solo Crushes were honestly all my favorites. They were my favorites as far as flavor and texture, and that's the beer geek side. My favorite beer actually was Beach Life. It's drinkable. It was very drinkable. I could consume more than one and not feel like I was beat up. And I think I said it was very drinkable. Yeah. I liked it. It's not complicated. Not everything has to be complicated. Not everything has to be a fight. Not everything has to be the biggest, baddest thing you've ever tried. And that's where that Beach Life fits in for me. The Solo Crush or any of them, they're all really well done. They're completely, and each one was unique, but not so unique that it was black and white. The Beach Life I found was the one where I'm going to a party, or I'm having my friends over, or I was sitting in the backyard and my neighbor and I are talking over the fence, and I could pass him a beer and it wasn't strange. And that's what I really liked about it was
your neighbor who's not a beer geek.
My neighbor who doesn't drink beer. They noticed the van, and we were chit-chatting about the color of the grass, or what color, which way the clouds were going, and it was just something to be social. And when they asked for a second one, or where I got it, I knew that I was onto something. The conversation may or may not have been as good as the beer was, but the beer was definitely the catalyst to make that relationship a little bit better.
Wet Hop Solo Crush was my absolute favorite, but I would say depending on which way the wind's blowing, I could also go for Beach Life. And it sounds really basic. Like, I wish I had something different to say about my favorite beers this year, but Beach Life and Wet Hop Solo Crush were my 2 favorite Rebellion beers. Couldn't get enough of them.
And I've asked a lot of my friends, and I've gave them some samples of the Beach Life, and right away they go to the name and they're like, Beach Life, but it's October or it's November, and I'm like, okay, just relax. Let's talk about football. And as we're talking about football and we're having a beer, I said, so what do you think of the beer? And they're like, well, it's good. And I'm like, so would you switch from your national industrial brand beer? And they're like, well, yeah. I said, so why would you do that? Why would you switch? I'm trying to understand. And they said, well, I never knew that a local product didn't have to be geeky. I didn't know a local product didn't have to be over the top or punch you in the mouth with flavor. I said, but it's got flavor. And they're like, it doesn't taste like water. And I'm like, so that's a little different than your national industrial brand. Absolutely. But I said, can you enjoy more than one of them? Yes. And I'm like, there you go. Like, that's what it's all about.
It didn't feel like you're compromising on flavor or quality by drinking it.
No, I felt that because the alcohol content, the ABV wasn't really crazy, it could be my go-to beer. I've always got a 6-pack in my fridge. I do have IPAs and our sours, which I love all those beers. But I'll have one IPA, and I can always shift down and go into a Beach Life. It's just beer. It's what beer should taste like.
What beer surprised you for 2020?
I don't think it was one. It was our sour beers, our Rebellion sour beers really surprised me. because I wasn't a sour guy. I wasn't into that stuff. I thought I liked some sours, and then I realized that sours weren't for me. And then when we came out with a lower ABV, sessionable type sour that had a lot of flavor, and when I seen a lot of women drinking it, I was like, wow. And because they're really sensitive to flavor, they're really sensitive to different sours and textures, and it wasn't about fruitiness. It was that they know what flavor is. They really get it. And some of them hated it, some of them loved them. It surprised me to see how fast they moved for us, and the unique flavors we came out with. The pineapple was one of the big ones for me, and I really dug it. That was surprising, and it wasn't surprising that it's my favorite. It was surprising about how the people of Saskatchewan kind of rallied around these sour beers, and then people decided they were beer geeks all of a sudden to enjoy them, you know.
One of my all-time favorite beers was from this summer from Multinational. And what kills me is I know it was an IPA, and I can't remember the damn name, but it was a hot summer day, and I'd been walking for like 4 hours, pounding the pavement. It's just like my hat was soaking wet. Like I took my hat off my head, it was dripping. And I walked up to the window. Guy hands me this crisp cold one. I think it was the fastest beer I've drank in my life, but it was just perfect. And I wish I could remember the name, but I just keep coming back. I'm like, that was like a wonderful summer moment. And it really made me think Malty is a brewery to watch for 2021 and going into the future, because they've really got it dialed in. They've figured out who their audience is and what they want, and they give it to them.
I think that you're absolutely correct. I think that Multinational, they're dangerous. I think they sandbag. I think that.
What do you mean sandbag?
I think that they don't stretch their legs out. I don't think they tell people how good they are, and then all of a sudden it's like, bam, they hit you in the face, and they're like, oh, I guess you're that good. You're pretty good. I look at breweries like, or not breweries like, but the big ones was Blackbridge and Nokomis. They're pretty stalwart. They've been around for 6.5 years now, 7 years almost, and Rebellion's kind of been right there with them. I've been always rather concerned about Pile of Bones, and when I say concerned, that as a sales standpoint, they're always one of the tougher ones to the local competitors, friendly competition type thing. I'm actually really excited to see which one of the new breweries kind of starts stretching their legs out that becomes the next Multinational. That, not that Multinational is going anywhere, but one of these other breweries are going to come around and it'll be like the same one. If you're always overlooked, and Saskatoon's got 9 miles, the same thing. You know, once you're able to get a little bit of their product out, and I don't buy a lot of growlers anymore. I don't get growlers filled. So for me, I try my beer through liquor stores. And some of the liquor stores or the breweries are a little bit more regional or hyper local to what stores they're able to service. So having the ability to go around the province doing some logistics and deliveries for Rebellion, I'm able to see some of the product in the stores where I get to try out a few different ones. And that is interesting. Pile of Bones, they've got some good beers, and their white IPA is probably one of our toughest competitors as far as best local beers go. It's a decent beer to drink. It's always right there. Malty, I'm scared to try their beers because I'm scared that one of their beers are going to become my favorite beers. And I do try them. Not as much as I should, but again, I'm more interested to see what's going to come out of Rafter R or Iron Bridge, or even going, like I said, going all the way back up to Battleford and seeing what the next year is going to bring for Armory, because those guys can be dangerous. And now that they have a year or two of business under their belt, they're going to get a little stranger with what they feel their seasonals can be, and it's really exciting.
We know it takes about a year for a brewery to kind of tune in their equipment. And we know that equipment, when you're working on it, when you're scaling up, it has a personality, and you got to figure out its little tweaks and quirks to it. And once breweries kind of survive that, get over that hump, they can really start to. It's like having a Stradivarius versus having a piece of plastic to try and play music with. And if you go from a piece of plastic to a Stradivarius, it's going to take you some time.
Absolutely.
But you can make it really sing. I think Shelter has an opportunity to really punch above their weight. I see when I look online and in the forums a lot of positivity from the community, a lot of excitement about what Stuart and that crew is doing. I'm really looking forward to tasting more of their beers. My most favorite beer name this year was Hospital Parking from Malty, because they're like, you could always use more hospital parking.
That's right.
It's great for their neighborhood, and it's just like, fuck, parking sucks down there. It was such a great, timely pun. I just dug it.
I love their names. I think we've always been a little bit too politically correct on side of some of our names. We thought a little bit, we were trying to think too mainstream, where sometimes the really crazy thing about, say, Shelter or a Malty is a good example, is that they're not making a beer over and over again. It's here, it's gone. They might make, we make, for instance, we'll have 160 flats of beer in a single batch. They might make, maybe 80 or half is what we do, and that would evaporate through the logistical system. I think the toughest part for them, which I'd like to pick their brain about, is how they get all their names, because at some point you're going to run out. But on the flip side, I think all the nicknames and all the that stuff is really kind of cool. It pushes us to try to think of what's the next unique thing for ourselves.
Well, that's what bit me this year, because last year I was talking like, oh, we could do Pandemonium. It's going to be funny. We'll have pandas. It'll be kick-ass. But we had to sit on it because it was a stout. And then Phillips comes out with Pandemonium. I'm like, well, for fuck's sake. Because I literally go back and I'm like, when did Phillips launch this beer? I'm like, okay, it's this date. Yeah. And then I go look back at our emails, and literally a year and a half before Phillips even launched Pandemonium, I was like, here's me talking to Mark and Paul. What about Pandemonium as a name? And here's the concept. And they beat us. Fuck.
I think one of the valuable lessons, and the first time I seen it was about 4 or 5 years ago when we went to Philadelphia and sat in on a little kind of symposium type thing, where they started talking about nicknames and beer types and naming your beers and this and that. And
what was that conference called?
It's not the Great American. It's the national. It's a national brewers conference. The CBC. Yeah, it's CBC. So
Craft Brewers of America?
Craft Brewers of America, yeah. When we went down there and sitting in on this thing there, they started talking about nicknames, and the really crazy thing is they realized that you can't go after breweries for naming your individual beers. They said there's over almost 7,000 breweries at that time. At some point, someone's going to come up with the same name you do, right? And so you have to dance the dance to think about popularity versus what region you're in, who your competitor is. Are you able to have a conversation with your competitor? Is it a mothballed name? Is it all these different things? When I hear of something of, parking or whatever that multinational comes up with, I'm like, we would never have thought of that. No, that's. But on the flip side, you don't see people dancing with the name Night Viper very often in our conversations either. So I think you can kind of see the personality that's coming out from the people behind, the kettles, and you see the personalities behind. And we're not all marketing people. It's not about we're a marketing company that happens to sell beer. We're brewers, and we're people that are all kind of brought in from different areas to help or make a brewery great. And coming up with those names, it's a little bit of personality. I think we've danced with the Beach Life name, and then there was a lot of conversation behind it. And some people we still have that internal fight to whether that's a seasonal name or it's not. But, I sometimes I just close my eyes and drink what's in the can. And if it's delicious, it's delicious,
When I want to circle back to what you were talking about with Pile of Bones White IPA, why I think that beer is exciting or interesting is that it gives people permission to get into and taste and enjoy IPA, but it's not scary. It's not like Zilla, where we're going to punch you in the mouth with hops. It's, hi, I'm White IPA, and I'm your friend, and I'm going to give you a little kiss on the lips and some flavor. But then it's like a gateway, where it's like, well, I tried that White IPA, maybe I'll try this other IPA, maybe I'll try that IPA. I think it's a great opportunity to introduce a market that is young to a very diverse, complicated style that is also really beloved.
I think everybody wants to be an IPA and they want to be a hophead and they want to say that I drink that. And they found,
I mean, the cool kids.
They want to be cool. Yeah, they want to show up at a party and they want to put their IPA down and they want to wear a plaid shirt even though it doesn't really fit them that well. They might wear pointy shoes and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. The White IPA is definitely a gateway beer. Pile of Bones has helped the industry quite a bit in making a beer that has the right name, that a lot of people can recognize. They use those 3 special letters, and everybody wants to be part of that club. And the beer is very drinkable. And because it's drinkable means they'll have a second one or they'll buy the product again. It also gives them the opportunity to say, I want to try that Golden Crush now from Rebellion, or I want to try, what's that New England IPA all about coming out of a Blackbridge, or I really want to try that Rebellion Hazy. And when I explain to people that you're not really the hazy type of person, they're like, yes, I am. I drink White IPA. And I'm like, that's fabulous. Just be careful. You better lace your boots up because this stuff, it steps up, right? It steps up. And even in the Pile of Bones line, they go up to their Space Cadet and then, a couple other ones. They are bigger, badder beers than what the White IPA is. But I often said, even with our Cerveza and our Lentil, which are kind of gateway beers for us, they're entry level. And sometimes I really enjoy that. It doesn't need to be complicated, but that the White IPA does something it's a little bit bigger. It's a little bit bigger than just a beer. It's kind of helps out an industry.
If I was to compare it to a similar gateway beer for me, it would have been Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. But even then, I look back at Sierra Nevada's Pale Ale, and it feels like a snapshot in time because my palate and my decision-making for choosing a beer has changed. That beer is the same. And that was kind of my gateway into a bigger, more aggressive beer. But it was like, it's okay. You could just have this and then move on,
Absolutely. That Pale Ale from Sierra Nevada, that was always been my staple. My favorite beer, maybe of all time history, has been Anchor's Steam Beer. And I loved Anchor, and I loved everything about it. And the Sierra Nevada was right there. That was my second go-to. And my third beer, until I could make it properly, was the Chico Pale Ale that Dave Rudge developed when he was at the Bushwhacker. And those have always been the staple for me. They're 5% alcohol. I didn't know that we could get a pale ale or an IPA, but under 5%. I didn't think we could do it under 5% with flavor, and I didn't think we could do it under 5% with flavor and texture and keep all the 3 elements of the tripod together that we need to have a really good beer. And when I say tripod,
let's break down tripod for me. What do you mean?
I often talk to our customers about the tripod, and everyone kind of laughs at me about it. But a tripod to me, every beer's got 3 components. It's got its bitterness, it's got its bitterness with the hops, it's got its alcohol content, ABV, and it's got its mouthfeel and texture and flavor. And if any one of those pieces is too out of balance, the tripod falls over. The beer doesn't taste balanced, and it falls apart. And you can try it, and I've made beers, and I've tried them from breweries that are usually pretty green breweries. They're newer, where they haven't really honed in that recipe, and you're like, oh man, it's so full of hops, but there's the alcohol doesn't balance it out, or you washed out the mouthfeel because it's just a hop bomb, basically what we used to call it, or you taste a beer and you're tasting booze and you're tasting hot alcohol notes, or it's like a double IPA that's just tastes like alcohol, and you're like, where's the mouthfeel? Where's the maltiness? Or you washed out the bitterness because you got too much booze in it. And I used to get that a little bit more in Belgian beers, where they wouldn't have that hoppiness to balance it, but there's always a sweetness in there, and you're always looking for those three components. And I believe that really well designed beers, you can kind of base this on a really basic theory and just look at the tripod effect, and trying to take that tripod effect and you flip back over to, for instance, our Golden Crush, and you're like 4.5% alcohol. That's great. That means I can have a couple of them and still function like a normal human being. And then you're like, oh, it's got flavor to it? Yeah, it's got a lot of flavor, but it's only 4.5% alcohol. But the alcohol's enough that, oh, it bounces off that bitterness really well, or that fruitiness, or that that tropical flavor that you're kind of getting out of the hops. And you're like, this is a really cool thing, right? And as we scale it up and you go into our Zilla, for instance, or a hazy, which actually would be the next step in the progression, is that you try that hazy and you're like, oh, I get a little bit more booziness, but the hazy becomes a little bit more dangerous because there's a lot of juice in there. There's a lot of fruity and different esters that you're picking up, but the hoppiness is still there, that you're drinking a hazy IPA, and that mouthfeel doesn't go away, which is phenomenal because it's easy to wash it away with the alcohol. And you dance that all the way up to our double IPA. And our double IPA, to me, it's a little bit too big for me, to be honest with you. It's not my go-to. I'll have one every once in a while. A 4-pack lasts me, a month.
But it makes my cheeks warm when I have one.
It makes my cheeks warm. It makes me warm. I enjoy it, but it's a treat.
And I'm not driving after it.
No,
I'm pitting in for the night. Yeah, that's it.
I'm usually sitting in the garage. I'm playing with a dirt bike, or I'm just thinking about life and my next step. And I sit back and have a double IPA, and I think, wow, I've tried a few, especially when you're traveling. When I was traveling down south, and it didn't taste like this. A few of them were really hot alcophenols. You sometimes get a headache really instantly from it. It blows you up. Other times I've had them where they're just hop bombs, and that's all you get, and it's bitterness, and it's bitter. It's not it. There's no texture to help it out. So I often will tell customers, especially if they're trying to learn about beers, and explain how we strive about having a tripod effect on every beer that we make. It just keeps it balanced, and it keeps the customer coming back.
I think that's something interesting if you're maybe a low information beer consumer, or maybe you're still learning, you're trying to get along with it, and you can say, look at these 3 factors, and does the beer I'm drinking meet these or balance them out? That's a nice way to kind of think about it.
Absolutely. I think what's really fun to do, and like I say, maybe in the next 6 months, maybe it'll take 8 months, whatever, 9, 10, is we get out of this COVID and being able to sit around with a group of friends again, something that we used to do in the past, and try different beers. And you didn't have to be a beer geek, and you don't have to be a judge to do this. It's just sitting around with some friends and deciding what you like. And you can do it blind, you can do it open, and take one can, 16-ounce can, 4 guys, 4 ladies, and 4 ounces each, and you just share it, and more sample glasses the better, and try 4 or 6 beer more and compare them side by side.
That's one of my favorite things we do at Rebellion.
Yeah, I find that it's great for team building. It helps some of the newer people come in. It kind of welcomes them to the party, but more so, it helps us all with our beer training a little bit. You know what I mean? Like it helps us. One, it helps us focus in on what other breweries are doing. Because even myself, I get blinded to Rebellion product, maybe a little bit more so. Um, but on the flip side to it, it kind of, we start to understand, especially when we travel down south and we get a lot of different canned products, about stale dating, and not everybody is the same, and sometimes there's just not some beers that aren't well done, and it's okay to discover it, right?
I will say that when I do see dates on a bottle of a beer that I thought was particularly terrible or horrendous, if it's old, I'm like, okay, that's probably wasn't what the brewer intended. It's pretty fucking old. And I'm willing to be forgiving and say, I'll try that again, but only if I can get it fresh.
I think, and I learned this when I was I was at a bar in Vegas in 2009, pardon me, 2008, and it was called the Freakin' Frog in Vegas. And they had 800 different beers in their cooler, and they only had 16 beers on tap. And I tried a Delirium on tap, which I don't necessarily recommend doing because it's pretty big, bad beer. And when you're handed a beer binder to figure out what your next beer is going to be, there's a lot to it. But what I kind of realized was stale dating is a real thing. Not getting the best interpretation of what that beer should be it's tough. Drinking it on tap is usually a little bit different than a different experience. Not necessarily a different taste or a texture. It's just a different experience than drinking it out of a bottle or a can. Normally, when you're drinking it off tap, you're sitting with your friends. And where I go with that is pints have always been a very social thing. Whereas cans or bottles, it can be sometimes very introverted. And trying that bottle at home alone might taste different. And you're like, well, it didn't taste the best. And you go back to the date and you're like, oh, it's 18 months old or 2 years old. I've got beers that are home that are, I don't want to say that they're over 10 years old, but I probably should have drank them when their best before date was within 6 months.
One of the things I miss most about pre-COVID was going to a restaurant and just looking at the menu and saying, okay, this is a craft beer I haven't tried yet. I'm going to discover something new maybe. And maybe you get lucky and taste something great. I really miss that about 2020 kind of sucking. Where do you see 2021 going from here?
I think that, well, I hope 2021 ain't going to suck. I
Knock on wood.
knock on wood. I'm knocking on my head. Yes. I honestly think that I think that we're in for an exciting year. I think people are going to be excited to go out and move around. I think that the beers are going to be exciting to try out. I think that if we get some glimmer of a ray of light, as it might be, I think a lot of breweries are going to be just throwing their best punches right away. Just everyone's going to try and get a foothold, and it could be a really exciting time.
I feel a little more pessimistic. I feel like 2021 is going to be swimming with weights around your feet, and we're going to be kind of waiting for restaurants and kind of waiting on people to feel safe enough to go back out and do these things all normal without all the masks and the distancing and the basically the hassle of going out.
I see that. I think that's going to be a normal thing. I don't think masks are going to go away for a long time. So
really,
I think that it's going to be part of regular life. I think that some of the rules have been in place aren't going to go away that easy. But that being said, if it becomes okay to go out and restaurants can get their volumes back up and you can go to your local pub and sit around with a group of your friends with more than your circle, I think that we have to take the small victories. I don't want to look at the big picture. I want to look at let's get through this dangerous phase we're in right now. Let's get some of the numbers back up in the bars and restaurants. Let's be able to be social again, and be safe about it. And I think that if we can get some of that stuff happening, the other stuff it'll happen without us even realizing it. Deadly.
Paul, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's been a blast. Maybe we'll have to do it again.
For sure. Rebels, thanks for listening today. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, be sure to join us on our brand new Facebook group page, the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I'm also proud to let you know that we're members of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. It's a one-stop shop for tons of locally produced shows from across our province, and you can find them at saskpodcastnetwork.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Untapped so you don't miss out on the latest in Sask craft beer. Thank you for joining Rebellion.